In this session, we will explore some strategies for helping our students to learn effectively in group activities. One of the things that typically happens in a class is when students arrive for the first session, they will find a seat to their liking, and that will become their campsite for the remainder of the session. One of the things we want to try to do over the course of any class is to mix things up a bit and provide opportunities for students to interact with varied groups of classmates. I call these linking strategies. So as an example, imagine that you have 16 students in your class. Take the jacks, queens, kings, and aces from a deck of cards, deal them out randomly, and the card designation becomes their group for the activity that lies ahead. Another strategy is to use candy bars like Snickers, Milky Way, Butterfinger, placing them in a bowl in predetermined numbers and asking students to pick out their favorite candy bar. Those candy bar designations then become their small group for the upcoming activity. Another strategy is learning partners. In this one, called round-the-clock learning partners, I would provide each student with a piece of paper that looks much like this slide. As you will note, out from each number is a line. So for example, I would go to another student and say, "Would you be my 1 o'clock learning partner?" Once they agree, they would write my name on their sheet, and I would write their name on my sheet. In subsequent weeks, I would ask students to sit with their 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 7 o'clock learning partner. So as this activity begins, each student makes 12 appointments with 12 different people, providing opportunities for 12 different sets of interactions over the coming weeks. In a smaller class, I could use seasonal learning partners and have people make 4 appointments: summer, fall, winter, spring. We provided some resources along with this episode of 3-Minute Magic that will give you some other ideas for creating linking strategies in the classroom. Let's talk for a few minutes about the phases of group development. Research over the past several years has shown that groups go through a series of developmental phases as they work together and get to know one another. The first of those is forming. This is the initial stage, at which time members are beginning to establish their own identities within the group and to become better acquainted with one another. Some group members might be striving for acceptance and will do everything to achieve that from their fellow group members. Yet others might be interested in being the leader of the group and begin to exert some influence. One question that has a very logical answer is, do students prefer to work with groups composed of their friends and acquaintances, or groups that have been designed or formed by the faculty member? The answer is, they prefer to work with their friends. So although they enjoy these group experiences more, that does not necessarily mean that those groups will be more effective in achieving the outcomes that you have designed. The second stage of group development is storming. This is when conflicts begin to arise, and some of the roles that people wish to establish for themselves come into direct opposition. There may be competition, there may be strong opinions. At this point in the group's development, there is quite often chaos and a loss of hope that the goals can ever be accomplished. Quite often, students will comment that they don't like to work in groups. My response to that is very simple. Get over it. The reality is, for the rest of their lives, they will be working with groups of dysfunctional people. Be that in the classroom, in the workplace, at church, or in the community, we all have the experience of routinely working with dysfunctional groups that don't seem to accomplish the things that they were designed to do. So in my opinion, working in groups is a life skill. And when students find themselves in a dysfunctional group, one of the skills that they can develop is to figure out ways in which they can make that group more effective. The next phase of group development is norming. At this point, the rules and procedures and customs of the group become well established. People begin to acknowledge the gifts, talents, and roles that others are playing, and the group begins to establish their own set of rules for operation. Again, those rules can be very helpful and functional, or they can be very destructive and dysfunctional. The next level of group development is performing. Not all groups reach this stage of development. Some groups continue to wander around looking for ways to accomplish the outcomes that have been set forth for them, and never seem to make much progress toward achieving those outcomes. The goal of every group should be to reach this performing level, where they begin to realize the outcomes that have been set forth for them. And finally, we move to a journey. We don't do this one very well quite often. Groups will come to the end of their task, they will hand in that assignment, they will complete that activity that they have been assigned, and then they will go their separate ways. I would suggest to you that one thing you can do to help the groups in your classrooms at this level is to systematically conduct debriefing experiences at the end of every group activity. Provide students with the opportunity, either anonymously or publicly, to share with the other members of the group the roles that they played and the level at which they contributed to achieving the final objective. The group may also explore ways in which they could have been more effective as a group. What are some things we could have done differently? This debriefing experience makes the task and the process both important parts of the assignment. And in closing, 5 key rules of thumb. Number 1, group work is an intentional and purposeful learning experience. The more that you do in advance of the class to define the activity and what it is you hope for the groups to accomplish, the more likely that group activity will be successful. Number 2, good group work is dependent upon clear task directions. Let your groups know specifically what it is that you hope for them to accomplish. Provide them a rubric for that performance. Number 3, plan your group learning experiences in advance of the scheduled class. Again, this speaks to pre-planning and thinking about the timing for the introduction and the conclusion of the planned group activity. Number 4, help your students become effective group members and leaders. As we have described, debriefing is an important part of that process. Help them to think back over what they did and what the group did and how that came together in terms of the final assignment that they were to complete. And number 5, as a faculty member, planning and facilitating group learning is an acquired skill. It takes practice. The only way that you can really learn how to do effective group work with your students is to do group work with your students. And what you might also do after each group activity for yourself is to spend some time reflecting on what worked and what didn't, so that the next time you will be more effective and your students will be more effective.